this happened. The whole thing just didn't work. Bold and cheeky, no. Hello, amazing humans on the net. I have been very busy over the last 2 weeks because I've been reading all of the books on Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist, and so today that's what I want to talk about. Also, we are joined today by Roxy, my dog, who is resting right beside me. You can't see her, she's not in the shot. Maybe I will show her to you 1 second. So there she is. She's clearly not interested in what I've got to say about Women's Prize for Fiction. She's just happy to snooze right next to me. So, in case some of you are not familiar with Women's Prize for Fiction, this was established in 1996 to celebrate female writers and to give them a bit more exposure. The prompt behind it was the fact that in 1991 there were no books by female writers shortlisted for the Booker's Prize, despite in the same year 60% of the novels being written by women. And so over the years the prize evolved. It changed name several times. It used to be called also Orange Prize for Fiction, and then Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction as well. And so every year the judges pick, I think, 16 books for the long list, and then 6 of them are being shortlisted. This year's shortlist was announced on the 2nd of April, and the winner out of those 6 books will be announced in June, the beginning of June. In terms of the criteria, any full-length novel written in English by any nationality woman is eligible, and the judges take into account 3 things: excellence in terms of excellence in the way the book is written, originality, and accessibility. What I'm going to do is talk about the books in reverse chronological order as I read them, and I am going to rank them, but I'm going to do it at the end of the video. And the reason behind it is that, well, partially I'm still undecided on a couple of books. They're very, very close. And secondly, one of the books, The Safekeep, I wanted to leave to the end because I am going to include some spoilers. I almost never do it, but I do have to do it today for reasons I will explain later. However, please don't worry, I will clearly mark my chapters, so feel free to skip the Safekeep chapter and move on straight on to the ranking. So the first on the list is Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout. I was surprised to see this book being longlisted, well, and then shortlisted for Women's Prize for Fiction because it is part of the series. Can you read it without reading the other books? Yes, you can. However, having now read this and having read the first book in this series, this book does give away some things about the key character. So the first book in the series is My Name is Lucy Barton. I talked about that book in my Best Books of 2024 video, which I link above. And after that book, you're supposed to read Anything is Possible, and then you're supposed to read Oh William, and then you're supposed to read Lucy by the Sea, and only after that you're supposed to read Tell Me Everything. If you were going to, like me, read them in order, then I would hold off with this book because, like I said, Lucy Barton is a key character here. She's a bit older, a lot of things happen, and they just kind of given away, which is a little bit disappointing. I had no idea that this was the case because most of reviews tell you that you can read them independently and nothing is affected. However, my opinion on this is a little bit different now that I've read the first and the last book in the series. Parking that aside, this is still a fantastic novel in which we follow a bunch of different characters living in this community in the US in Maine. And while there is a certain crime that happens that anchors the story, it's not really the main focus. The focus are actually several stories of different people interlocked together. And so we have this set of characters who live ordinary lives, but through describing these ordinary lives, the author is exploring the meaning of life, making us as a reader more aware of how we as human beings are all broken in one way or another, and despite that, there is a meaning to our lives, or almost because of it, there is a meaning to our lives. My experience with this book, little bit like with the first book, My Name is Lucy Barton, was that it was a bit difficult to get into it at first, because why would you care about these very regular characters? However, as you keep reading, you do get invested in their lives, and because of that, almost like a quiet celebration of life that comes through these pages, you are suddenly hooked, despite there not being whatsoever any dynamic plot to this book. You can expect a very typical of Elizabeth Strout writing in this. She's got this way of making her narrative sound as if it was an alive storytelling. It does remind me a little bit of sitting in the kitchen with my grandmother or my grandmother's sister, or both of them, and listening to them chat about the local community and the neighbors and their lives. And Elizabeth Strout does it so well in this book because she constantly uses these sentences. Sorry, I'm just looking for the right page. On page 202, an example. But before they had their next walk together, this happened. By phrasing this sentence in this way, and then this happened, it's as if she's sitting next to us and telling us a story. I would call this a very much a life affirming book, and in a way reassuring and stoic. I think if you are down and you're looking for something to pick you up a bit, read Elizabeth Strout, and I'm sure she will help you gain a new perspective on your problems. I didn't manage to get my hands on a copy of The Persians, so I listened to the book on Audible, which is very well done, by the way. And so, on paper, this should have been a book that is very much up my street, because we follow 5 female characters from 3 different generations. We've got a grandmother, 2 daughters, and then 2 granddaughters. They are all Iranian. Some of them have emigrated to the US, and some of them have stayed in Iran. And so we have this different perspective, different life experiences, and different timelines, which span from 1940s right up to the current times. It's about a search for identity as we are a witness to the struggles and various problems that these characters face. The premise is brilliant. The writing is very, very strong. However, the book just didn't work for me. And I think that's because I just couldn't connect with the characters of this book. And part of it, I think, is the extreme wealth that these characters had. I mean, there is a one scene in this book where the main character, one of the daughters who lives in the US, she's in Aspen with her family skiing, and she goes to this luxury boutique and she purchases 30,000 worth of dollars, expensive designer watches. But then, wait for it, she just throws them onto the snow. They are completely wasted. She doesn't give them to anyone. She's just in this moment of rage and she just throws them all out. And so I really struggled to feel sympathy for someone who was so self-obsessed and self-absorbed and obsessed with the glory of the past and living in that past, and just so focused on trying to recreate that past, while at the same time being completely detached from, real life problems. And the aunt that I'm talking about, her name was Shireen, was probably the most extreme, but all 5 characters are to a certain extent like that. They are extremely self-centered. And I get it. I get that the message in the book was supposed to be that wealth can't fill emotional void, but the way it was portrayed in this book just didn't really resonate with me. And by the way, sometimes I do like a book despite not liking the characters, but in this case, the whole thing just didn't work. But maybe it was just me. Let me know. I really struggled with this book, and if I'm being honest, if I wasn't challenging myself to read the whole shortlist, I probably wouldn't have finished it. Sometimes I feel like, and this may be slightly controversial, but sometimes I feel like certain books get nominated for awards purely based on their setting, especially if they set in a country that is in a political conflict or has characters from countries with political conflict. And look, who am I to judge? Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's good that these sort of books are brought into the spotlight because they are making us more aware of the wider global issues. You know, that's what books do, right? They teach us about the world around us. But for me personally, if a book is going to win a major award, it also has to be an engaging and memorable experience. And I can't say that the Persians were that sort of book for me. If you've read this book, do let me know what you think about it. The next book is Good Girl by Aria Aber. And with this book, when I read the description, I was convinced I was going to love it. A story of love and family, raves and Kafka, staying up all night and surviving the mistakes of youth. Okay, let's start with positives. There is some excellent writing in this book, and immediately what came to my mind when reading this was The Belger by Sylvia Plath. And I didn't know it at the time that actually Aria Aber is also a poet. When I learned that she was also a poet, everything made sense because the writing in here is like in the Belger, very descriptive, very evocative. I really appreciated the voice in this novel. We follow a 19-year-old girl living in Berlin. She was born to two Afghan parents. She was born in Germany. She struggles a lot with her identity, with her place in the world, and she seeks refuge in the nightclubs, effectively. Now, did I enjoy this book? The answer is no. Unfortunately, it was a real chore to finish this book because while you have a great introduction in the beginning of the book to the characters, and there are some interesting things happening at the end that bring you certain conclusion, which is very much needed. Most of the book, nothing happens. When I say nothing happens, things happen. It's just they exactly the same. And for me, when I was reading for the 7th time that these young people went to the techno nightclub and took more drugs, for me, describing taking drug experience is a little bit like someone telling you about the dream they had. Unless you're the one experiencing it, it's very boring to listen to. And listen, I am a huge fan of literary fiction. I love books that focus on characters. They don't have to have a super dynamic plot for me to love a book. However, in this book, we're just going through motions. And then on top of that, you have this tone that is very brooding and very melodramatic. There's also a very nonchalant approach to drug taking. And again, just didn't jar with me. Maybe I'm not the target audience for this book. Would I reach for it if I didn't give myself a challenge to read all the books on the shortlist? No. For the next book, we have All Fours by Miranda July. Thank you very much to my lovely friend Lou who lent me this copy. All the other copies, by the way, are from a library. I didn't want to spend any money on books that I potentially may not enjoy. So, this book was a surprise. I didn't expect to like it as much as I did because I was expecting it to be a bit bonkers, a bit out there. This book has received a lot of publicity already, because I think it was nominated for National Book Awards, and it's quite controversial. And if you haven't heard about it yet, we follow a 45-year-old woman who embarks on this road trip, except instead of a road trip, she stops in a motel on day one and she stays there for the full 2 or 3 weeks. She redecorates completely the room where she is staying. She also befriends this local man and his wife, and they have these weird experiences. The key protagonist is definitely going through some kind of a stage of reviewing her life and her priorities. She is trying to reinvent herself in a way and renegotiate her place in the world and in the relationship. And I must say, I didn't expect to enjoy reading this book as much as I did. I ended up, oops, sorry, that's my dog shaking herself. I ended up loving this book. Huge part of it was excellent writing that is very dynamic. It's got lots of italics and brackets that the author uses to describe her thoughts. And also, it's got quite a dynamic plot. You do buy into this idea that you have to see where this is going. So yes, excellent writing. And also, maybe it's because I think as a 46-year-old woman too, I think there are some questions that we women ask ourselves at that age. And I really appreciated the fresh perspective that the author is presenting in this book on marriage and on parenthood and on relationship with ourselves. And there's also interesting perspective on aging and sexuality and generally human connection. And that fresh perspective in this book questions certain ways and the ways, things have been done for centuries and we take them for granted. Overall, I think this is a great portrayal of how complex people really are. There's a great quote on page 40. "One day, when we were both ready, I would reveal my whole self to Harris. This will be like presenting a sweater knitted in secrecy. Oh my God," he would say, "how did you find time to do this? Just here and there, whenever I could, sometimes even with you right there beside me. I didn't even know you could knit. There are a lot of things you don't know about me. That's the whole point of this sweater metaphor. Of course, if you're knitting for years, this sweater eventually becomes so huge that it simply can't be hidden. Isn't this excellent?" What a fantastic surprise. And I know, there are lots of people who have very mixed feelings about this book. And this was one of the reasons why I didn't think I would like it. But actually, it is worth reading. And the writing, like I said, is insane. I will definitely be reading whatever Miranda July writes next. Okay, for the next book, I have Fundamentally, which I don't have a copy of either. I listen to it as an audiobook. In this book, we follow Nadia, a young academic from London. She has a PhD, who, after some relationship trouble, accepts a United Nations job in Iraq. The job is to rehabilitate ISIS brides who are currently residing in this temporary camp. So this is about her trying to tackle that project, and as a result we get this in-depth, very funny portrait of international aid. Now here's an interesting fact which I learned after reading the book. The author did actually work as a strategic advisor on future of Iraq policy in the US. And that is kind of scary because if you've read the book, you know that the international aid and the whole diplomatic community is described as an extremely incompetent group of people, to the point where if any of it was true, it would make you lose faith in diplomatic forces or frankly any public sector. But I'm just hoping this is 100% work of fiction designed to entertain and not portray the facts. However, even though this is the setting of the book, really the book is about family. It is about love, it is about religion, because as we read this book, we get glimpses into the main character Nadia's life back in London before she left, where, you know, different things happened to her. She got dumped by her girlfriend. She was disowned by her mother for religious reasons. This whole story is told with this bold and cheeky and very direct sense of humor. I'm not sure if this will be for everyone, but what that does is make you read the book very fast. It definitely doesn't feel like a chore. It is written in this very accessible language. There's lots of swearing, by the way, so if you don't like that, I'm not sure if that's the book for you. It is very funny. I did laugh out loud several times. So overall, the language and the tempo of this book makes it an easy reading experience. It reminded me a little bit of the way Green Dot was written, with that edgy sense of humor. So I kind of raced through this book for the first, I don't know, 3/4, and then as things started to unravel, the main character started to annoy me a little bit, and also some of the things were too far-fetched for me. I don't know, maybe I'm just too practical, too pragmatic, but overall I think this is a great debut, and this is very, very light touch literary fiction. So if that sounds like something you would enjoy, please do pick up this book. And we have arrived at the final book, number 6, The Safekeep. I already talked about this book in my other video. However, I talked about it without any spoilers. But here, I do want to include a conversation on this major reveal that is being presented to us later in this story. So this is the moment for you to skip through to ranking if you don't want to hear the spoilers because you haven't read this book yet. First of all, in case you haven't seen my other video, this is wonderfully written in this very unnerving style where the tension just builds and builds and builds, and you know it's gonna blow up at some point. I also think there's a great character transformation because this Isabel that we don't like very much in the beginning of the book, we actually warm up to her by the time we finish the book. This does read like a dream. I really enjoyed this. I couldn't put it down. However, as I said in my previous video, this book lost a significant amount of its magic on me because I guessed the big twist, the big reveal in this book very early on in my reading process. The fact that the house in which Isabel lived used to belong to Eva's family became obvious to me early on, and I think that's because I grew up listening to my grandparents stories and my wider family stories who lived through WW2 in Poland, and they lived through the invasion of the Nazis and the Russians. And I guess that helped me understand that in the time of invasion, the concept of ownership, and especially property ownership, is completely disrupted. And I think the reason why lots of people love this book so much in the UK and in the US is because both of those countries haven't experienced on-land invasion during the war. In the UK we had bombings, but we didn't have Nazis marching on streets and walking into people's houses and, you know, taking over those houses like it was the case with my grandparents. And I know that in here it's not the Nazis, it's the story of a house who was lost by a Jewish family who was sent to the camp. So this is a little bit different story, but still, when it comes to that overall concept of the fact that the war disrupts everything and can potentially take everything from you, including the ownership of your house, it's still, I think, relevant. I would love to hear opinions from European readers about this book. If you've had sort of a similar experience to mine where the story wasn't as big of a surprise as it was designed to be, despite the fact that I guessed the twist in this book, This is still a wonderful novel. I highly recommend it, and I really, really enjoyed reading it. I was taken aback by it. Very elegant, very intriguing story that reads just so effortlessly. Oh, if I had one little gripe with this book, the ending is just slightly too neatly wrapped up for me. But it's not a huge deal. It gives us the conclusion that we need and this satisfying ending. Like I said, just a tiny little thing. Overall, fantastic book. So these are the 6 books, and for a bit of a context, I want to let you know that I have read Nesting, which was longlisted for Women's Prize for Fiction. I loved that book. I was so disappointed not to see it on the shortlist. I do think that Nesting should have been on the shortlist instead of at least a couple of other books. I also started reading Amma. About halfway through. I love it, and I really struggled with having to pull myself away from that book to be able to read the shortlist. Even though I haven't finished Amma yet, I already know this is a fantastic book. It's a bit of a ride and definitely should have been on the shortlist. I will also read The Crooked Seed as soon as I get a copy from my local library, and maybe I'll do a separate video on those 3 books. Maybe I'll call it the long list that should have been a short list. I don't envy the judges. It must be such a difficult choice because obviously we look at everything through our own perspective and we all have our opinions, and somehow these judges have to decide what objectively is the best book. It's an impossible task. Let's move on to the ranking. Starting from the bottom, and by the way, I'm ranking these not in terms of the worst to best, because I don't think there is a one bad book in this pile. I just think these books are for different audiences, and some of them, they weren't for me. So I'm ranking them in the order of least enjoyed to the most enjoyed, and also least engaging to the most engaging in my personal experience. So number 6, I'm very sorry, but it has to be Good Girl. This did feel like a huge chore to finish this book, and I am sure that there are people who will enjoy it. They probably a little bit younger than me, but yes, overall just too much of going through the same motions without progressing the characters. Number 5, The Persians. I don't have a copy, so I'm going to show you a picture of it. Again, this was a chore to finish. Number 4, in my opinion, again, I don't have a copy. It is Fundamentally. Even though this was an extremely entertaining book, it was probably for a different target audience than myself. I generally prefer a little bit more serious literary fiction. And like I said, I found the characters a little bit annoying in the second half, and the story slightly too far-fetched. Number 3 and number 2. So this is what was causing me the most trouble, because I couldn't decide between Tell Me Everything and All Falls. 2 very different books. However, in the end, I think I'm gonna put Tell Me Everything as number 3. There's nothing wrong with this book. It's a lovely, quiet book about human experience. But I have got to give this a second place because how original this book is, and also because of this fiery experience of reading you have when following the attempts at reinvention of the main character. I did find myself not being able to put this book down, and because of that, this gets the second place in my ranking. And number 1 comes as no surprise. It's The Safe Keep. I do have to say, this is a masterpiece, and in comparison to the other 5 books, when it comes to my reading experience, this book takes the top spot. Now, if I had to guess which book will win the award this year, all these 3 books I think have a good chance of winning, and I would be very happy if either of them won. But going through the process of elimination, I think all fours could potentially be too divisive book, because it is one of those books that people either hate or love, and the fresh perspective that is presented to us in this book could potentially be slightly too controversial for winning Women's Prize for Fiction, but I may be wrong about that. However, this is my assumption. So on that basis, I'm eliminating this book from my guessing process. So then we are left with these two books. Both wonderful books. They're very, very different. Either of them could win. This one just feels slightly too safe. I know that Women's Prize for Fiction tends to prefer books that touch on specific complex issues, and it's not that there is no complexity in this book, it's just that this book talks about nuances of human relationships through describing these ordinary lives, where this book touches on a very specific issue that has political and historical context, and for that reason I think this book has a better chance of winning. So I guess this is my prediction. I think the winner of 2025 Women's Prize for Fiction will be the Safe Keep. Let's see if I'm right. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this bit of a fun experience of talking about the shortlist and ranking the books. This is obviously all just according to my own personal opinion. This is not supposed to be taken too seriously. I think overall book awards are great because they make us talk about books more. I hope you enjoyed this sort of content, and if you do, why not consider subscribing? It really helps my still very tiny channel. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in my next video.